Welcome to Antique Sprinklers. Today we're going to be talking about the invention of the horizontal impact sprinkler and maybe another party who could have been involved whom you might not know about. And to do that, I need to give you a little bit of background about how I came to have this information. So last winter, through his daughter, I ended up getting a chance to speak with the chairman emeritus of Rainbird, a guy named Ludwick. Just a very nice guy, had great stories, and an interesting story of his own that I'll give you here briefly, just a thumbnail about his career. Art went to work for Rainbird in 1963 as an engineer and stayed with the company 60 years. In that time, he had a diverse array of jobs. He was involved a little bit with Rainy Sprinkler Sales and bringing that organization into Rainbird as Rainbird Eastern Sales, and he handled finances for Rainbird's foundry that was called Camsco. And if you've watched my videos, none of you guys watch my spray head videos, but on one of them I mentioned that the name Camsco was derived from the first initials of the first names of the La Fetra family, and Art happened to marry the S in Camsco, Sarah. And so not only was he working his way up in the company, he was also Betty and Clement La Fetra's son-in-law. And so the person I got to know is Clement La Fetra's granddaughter. And very nice folks. So anyhow, also in his career, Art was the general manager of a master turf dealer that they took over in the San Diego area, and eventually worked his way higher in the company until he was basically running it with his brother-in-law Anthony. And in the final stages of his career there, he became the chairman of the board of Rainbird. And really his career spans a time of incredible growth, both in the US and globally, and really in every kind of irrigation there is, from agriculture, which is really where they got their start, except I'm going to tell you about their first sale, which wasn't an ag sale, and turf with the golf market and sports fields, and obviously landscape irrigation is huge for them. So they are a very successful company. My opinion is that one of their strengths is that they have stayed a family-owned and run business all of these years. They're not trying to make quarterly statements and stuff like that, and so I think that is something that serves them very, very well. And they also seem to be very dedicated to quality and really listening to their customers. So I've been impressed with Rainbird as an organization since the very first time I ran into a mini-paw doing residential service when I was in college back in 1986. So it was a thrill to talk to him. He had great stories to tell. And for the next, and he was able to validate some things that I'd assumed, which was great, and clear up some things that I had wrong. So to tell the next part of the story, I think I'd like to talk about how Orton Engelhart and Clement La Fetra ended up being in the same place in the 1930s when all of this great invention happened. And so to do that, you've got to go back a generation. And on the La Fetra side, his mother and father were Methodist missionaries in Chile, in Santiago. And his dad's name, I've seen it two ways, either Ty Lee or Tyler. When I look at it written on some documents that have been scanned, it looks like Tyler to me, but who am I to say? So I'm going to call him Ty. And I'm going to use the nickname for his mom too, which was Lulu, because I think that's great. And I have a niece whose parents have called her Lulu from essentially the day she was born. So it has a warm spot in my heart. So Ty was quite a bit older than Lulu, and they got married there in Santiago. Ty had come from Ohio to be a missionary there. Lulu was born in Maine. Ty's brother had a school for women in Santiago, and that's where they were working. And after their marriage, they had kids in pretty rapid succession. Ty had been born in 1853. He was certainly no spring chicken by 1890 when they started having kids. and they had a daughter, Geraldine, and a son, Vincent, while they were, and another son, Bernard, while they were still in Santiago. And then around the turn of the century or so, maybe early in the first decade of the 20th century, they moved to Glendora, California, because there were already La Fetras living there. They had a big property. And so that puts them there when their son Clement comes along in 1905. So we're going to put a pin in that there. Remember the name Vincent. Vincent's coming back in the story. And let's go talk about the Engelharts for a minute. And so Orton Engelhart's father, Heinrich, was a son of German immigrants. He was born in Indiana. And around 1880, he made his way out to Southern California and lived in Compton. And then eventually, he and his wife moved to Glendora as well. And you know, the other thing that's interesting, I mentioned that La Fetra had been born in 1853. Heinrich Engelhart was born a few years earlier than that. And so you get this odd coincidence where both Clement and Orton had fathers who were basically 51 when they were born. And that struck me very personally. You know, my two daughters are full-grown adults and living in large cities on their own now. But here in Maryland, there is a step, Antique Sprinklers, who that little guy is 12. So I can identify with those older gentlemen getting up in the morning and contending with a young one around. And it does keep you young, and it is a joy forever, I promise you. So enough about that. So you've got now the Engelharts and the La Fetras in the same place at the same time. And, you know, Orton was heavily involved in citrus farming, but he lived with his folks. He'd been a sickly child, and they didn't really expect him to survive, is the story that I was told. And in looking at his World War I draft card, the word epilepsy is scrawled across the back, and I'm sure that made him ineligible for the draft. But the story starts to come together there, you know, you have a child who has some sort of health problems. You know, the doctors say that he has epilepsy at the time of World War I. And to me, that makes his story all the more remarkable, you know, because farming is no joke as a profession. It's very hard work and very long hours. And on top of that, he still had an inventive mind and a creative spirit, and would spend hour after hour tinkering in that famous shed of his, you know, trying to improve irrigation so that you didn't get soaking wet when you set up a sprinkler and things like that, and you distributed water better, you know. So he's doing that, and irrigating the citrus fields required a lot of labor at the time. Now Vincent had gone to the University of California, Berkeley, and his older sister had gone to Stanford, which I think is quite an accomplishment for a woman in the second decade of the 20th century. And but he was back home and working, and Clement, by the time, you know, Orton is a grown man and taking over running the citrus farm that the family had there, is doing odd jobs of different kinds. I think he had a job delivering auto parts, things like that. And when it was time to irrigate, Orton would get his friends together to help, because it was a heck of a lot to set up and move and things like that. And so both Vincent and Orton and Clement were involved in that with him. And he's tinkering and working on this stuff all the time. And I just imagine them out in the field seeing how something he's come up with worked. And it'd be amazing fun, but there's also a lot on the line because he's got to grow what he's growing and get it to market. And so about a year ago, I was doing some research online, and I first discovered that Orton and Vincent La Fetra were born roughly the same year. Vincent's birthday is like July 29th, 1900, and Orton's was, I think, in May, 1899, and Orton's was in May of 1900. So they're just months apart. Clement came along like 5 years later. So as I look at that, I see the kid brother there, but I'm thinking these two guys probably knew each other fast. I would just, the natural course of things, you know. And then I found this article online. It was just a really tiny thing in a newspaper down in the San Diego area, a little town called Ramona, where it just announced that successful citrus growers Orton Engelhart and Vincent La Fetra were in town looking for property for a citrus farm. And so again, that makes that connection tighter in my mind. So I got to talking with Art that day, and that was one of the questions that I had for him. Is like, it just seems to me the more natural person to be a partner with Orton probably would have been Vincent rather than Clement. And so Art at that point told me that he'd seen records of Vincent being paid a royalty on the early Rainbird patents for the impact sprinkler, and that not long into Rainbird's life, Vincent decided to sell his portion of the royalties in perpetuity, or the 17 years of the patent anyway, to Orton and go on and do other things. And that sort of bears out in the, I don't know, the electronic paper trail I found, if you want to call it that, where in 1940 in the census, Vincent lists his occupation as having to do with orchard sprinklers. And in 41 or 42, I think 1942, when he's registering for the draft in World War II, that draft card said that he was working for the Forestry Service at that point. So that might have been that time period where he sold his sort of share of whatever part of the work on the inventions that he'd done and moved on. And speaking of his draft card, he did serve in the military, but back in World War I. He was a private, and he was part of the Coastal Guard. He was part of a battalion that did, had coastal batteries or something, the artillery that guards the shores there. And interestingly, his son ended up being a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and had a very lengthy military career. He started out flying light bombers in World War II, switched to being a fighter pilot, and stayed in the Air Force for World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and unfortunately passed away very young. He was only 50 in 1975 when he died, and his father, Vincent Sr., was only 63, maybe 64 when he passed away. So certainly from where I am now in life, this seems very, very young. So I was very grateful to have this opportunity to talk with Art Ludwick. He was a wonderful guy, a very interesting person, remembered incredible details from years and years ago, was able to set me straight on some things I thought and confirm some other things. And so in future episodes, I will be quoting from that conversation as, the topic has anything to do with what we talked about. So, I just want to, celebrate for 2 seconds here, whatever the contribution, now lost to time, that maybe Vincent La Fetra had. Kind of bring him into the light for a minute, but also kind of sit in awe of someone who sort of went through the childhood that Orton Engelhart did, and having a pretty serious condition, still managed to run a farm. He grew avocados until very late in life, led a very productive life, was constantly inventing, and was able to overcome what a lot of folks would consider to be a pretty serious setback. So the whole story is very interesting. Obviously, it turned agriculture on its ear. You can argue that the above ground irrigation is almost de facto an invention of Rainbird, and certainly many corporations copied what they'd done for decades, and you'll still see sprinklers that look not very much unlike the ones I've got on the table in front of me being sold today around the world. So that's my little bit of history for you today. I'd like to talk about the sprinklers for a minute here. The two earliest ones are the ones that are like, the first descendants of the patent. And so I have a 60 here, and the 60 was dropped from the product line very, very early. I think this guy's from the 1930s. You'll notice it doesn't have a cast brass body. The arm, the lever, is very angular. It has this pressed in metal piece to create the spoon instead of being cast. The bearing is cast. It's not from, a tube or, that octagonal bar of brass you see sometime and then milled. And then they did machine the threads into the bottom of the casting here for it. And lastly, the spindle has a hole on each side of it that you can pass a rod through, and that's how you hold that thing steady while you break the head loose to do any kind of maintenance on it. And like I said, very, very early in Rainbird's history, they dropped the number 60 from the product line. And behind it here, then you see the 65. And so following very quickly on that very famous, patent 1997901 for the horizontal impact, Orton developed the part circle reversing sprinkler as well. And this is the 65. It doesn't say 65 on it. I think this is it does say 65. I stand corrected. But I think it's a very early example. It is part circle only. You can't move the trip pin out of the way. And this guy is so old. It's a 1930s sprinkler. It's a little temperamental when it's time for it to trip and reverse. So you'll see that kind of struggle a little bit. And then once you get the idea that, it's no spring chicken, I edited out of the rest of them. And there's no way I'm going to take it apart to fix it. I'm not putting a screwdriver on this thing for love or money. And it's amazing to me that it has survived like that. I do want to give a shout out to my good friend Frank Norcia, who has rebuilt sprinklers for over 40 years, and in that time created an amazing collection that over the last few years he's been willing to share with me, and that's allowed me to share it with you guys. And these two are from his collection, and they're two of his best. They're just amazing. The other series of sprinklers that we're going to show you are the 40s, because they came about at the same time. And really, by 1938, Rainbird had a full line, 20s, 25s, 40s. They weren't doing a 30 or a 35 back then. They had a 45, which is a really quirky looking sprinkler that you've seen if you follow my videos, on up to an 80. So it was a pretty solid lineup really right away. But you can see when they made very significant changes in manufacturing. So this metal is almost like a galvanized metal. And again, you've got this very angular lever and the pressed in spoon. One difference is now this is now made out of brass stock rather than being casted. Your bearing there. It still does have, watch me have the wrong one. No, it still does have the holes through it for the bar to hold the spindle still while you break the sprinkler loose. And so this guy is definitely a 1930s sprinkler. They did stick with that design for a while and come out with some upgrades to it. This one has that more rounded lever that you'll find in the later 40s. It has a completely cast spoon. It still has the same metal for the body, but the innovation in it is the spindle, which now has the slot. You think of it as like a giant screwdriver slot or something, but it's where a spindle wrench goes to hold the spindle in place while you break the head loose when you're fixing it. And then that is still in use on just about every impact today. It's quite an innovation. And so also we're going to be taking a look at the 40 that everybody thinks of, I think, when they think about an antique Rainbird number 40, but it's really the third or fourth generation of number 40s, and it's got the completely cast bronze body. It has that really iconic curving lever and the cast spoon. This guy came in a low angle model and had variations where you'd have like a really thick bearing on the bottom for sandy conditions and stuff like that. So a few different variations on it by the time this came along, and I'm thinking that we're well into the 1940s. I will say this is one of the most successful agricultural sprinklers in history, especially of that era, because if you look at even just, allied brands like aluminum fitting manufacturers or something like that, if they're showing agricultural sprinklers, they're drawing something that looks exactly like this on it for the most part. Buckner got in there a little bit, but when somebody's showing like how to lay out a solid set, there's going to be a silhouette of this sprinkler in the brochure somewhere. So I don't know how many of these they sold. Today you can still buy hundreds, if not thousands of them. I bet I have 20 in the basement. So I just think this thing was had to be one of the engines that drove the economics of Rainbird, up to like 1960, say. And then they took the 40 and upgraded it into a modern sprinkler, updated it. And so this guy here came off of a farm in Long Island after years of service. I think it's a 1970s or late 60s sprinkler, and it works great. I'm really impressed. It came from my friend Tom Romansky up there, who was the guy who had the big 3-inch Buckner Giant that we highlighted a few months ago on a video, and he sent it to me for nothing. What's free these days? Well, a 40B is free if you have a good friend in the business of owning 40Bs. And then this one is just for fun. So I'm including it because it does say 40 on it, and I've always been intrigued by the 40 FCH or EFC. It has the frost cap. Something has happened. They've engineered off the back end of the lever. This is new old stock. I think it's from the 1970s. It really doesn't look like a wrench has ever been on it, other than when I, put it on the tripod to run it, and it works great. It's amazing to me that the thing works with this design. They made another one. I think it was the 30 as well, but this is the one I think that a lot of collectors have. And again, it said 40 on it, so probably another 1970s sprinkler. And then they introduced something called the 14070, which is a very long throw, 3/4 inch impact. And eventually the 40 disappeared from the product line, probably in the very early 1980s. And so that's kind of the lineage of it. I wanted to take something kind of from beginning to end of its life. And so the 40 was a good candidate. So I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of history. Like I said, the future videos about Rainbird will probably all have a little tidbit from that conversation I had with Art Ludwick. Just a wonderful guy, fascinating person to talk to. And I hope you enjoy watching these. We're gonna run every single one of them. To be completely honest, I had to change the nozzle in the 60 to get it to run. It was just a little too much for my system here. But after I did that, it ran great. Each of these runs great. You'll see the 65 struggle a little bit to reverse, but it also runs incredibly well for as complex as it is and how old it is. And as always, thank you so much for watching.